the latest data show another rise in COVID.
Hello and welcome to In the News Right Now. I'm Gareth. I'm flying solo in Derby this week as Leilani is away in the Maldives. Not jealous in the slightest. She will be joining us on the panel today, though, presumably in her snorkeling gear, as the Maldives were meant to be underwater by 2018, and I doubt the science is ever wrong. Also on the panel this week, social commentator Lizzie Barker and Heart of Oak podcaster Peter McIlvenna. We'll be talking about Jacinda Ardern's resignation, Tony Blair at Davos, Facebook and Instagram allowing naked breasts, but only non-binary ones. I don't know either. And finally, the horrific case of Danielle Stephanie Warrener, the Canadian woman killed by security guards at Toronto General Hospital for not wearing a mask properly. And what adds insult to murder, basically, is that the judge simply threw the case out, despite now publicly viewed video evidence. Let's start with Jacinda's resignation. Leilani, what are your thoughts? You're a big fan of Jacinda. Should we be celebrating or be careful what we wish for?
You know what? We should be celebrating because it's great she's out. Obviously, she said she was very tired now. So I think working for the Devil's obviously very tiring for her. But the thing is, we can't really celebrate because this guy coming in is not really a huge difference to her. He could possibly be worse. So I'm going to just say, let's wait and see. I'm happy she's out. I don't know how I feel about the replacement.
No, I mean, he was quoted as saying that you should hunt down the unvaccinated, which is quite an extraordinary thing to say. Lizzie, what do you think about it? Do you think she's gone basically because she is tired and she's been doing the job for a long time, or is there a little bit more to it?
I think there's a lot more to it. I think that I read an article a couple of days ago where she's saying she's burnt out and she's been getting death threats. Her family have been getting vilified, and so is she because of past 2 years and the work that she's done within her leadership. But I'm with Leilani on this. So I think I was happy to know that she was resigned. I don't think it is at all a great leader for what she did to the people of New Zealand in the past 2 years. The economy, the industries, the farming industries, the hospitality, it's never recovered from the lockdowns. And there was a guy, political Cameron Slater. He published an article and he's dealt with a lot of political leaders since like the 70s. And he said she is the only one that he would class as pure evil.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
Yeah.
What about you, Peter? What are your thoughts on it? Because New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they were sort of the big three, weren't they, in terms of just being so draconian throughout COVID. And then obviously America's joined them now since the senile sniffers come in. What are your thoughts on New Zealand in general in terms of their trajectory with or without Jacinda?
I think the trajectory will stay the same. I mean, obviously, we're extremely happy that someone who has destroyed the country and destroyed people's lives and killed many people is gone. But it's not that actually the country necessarily wants a change in direction. That's the scary thing, that if you look at the polls, people have been lulled into a sense of, well, they feel a bit more safe and secure. The big brother is looking after them, is caring for them, is telling them what to do. And many people have bought into that. But then if you look at the individual taking over, I think it was the AFT called him Mr. Fix-It. So I don't know if that's his title, but I think he was leading the response to the pandemic. And he's, I think, education minister previously. So him stepping into that role will just carry on the same as Jacinda was called evil that has continued. So I don't. And here, look, in the UK, we can be happy with that, but actually we're all in such a crap situation. It's not as if we are free of any tyranny and it's only over there. Actually, we've all suffered different levels of that tyranny. So it's wonderful she's gone. I think it'll continue. Rishi Sunak, is he any better or worse than Jacinda Ardern? No, not really.
No, that's a fair point. I think with Jacinda, it's an interesting thing because for me, if someone tells me that someone's wonderful, Why are they telling me that? I always question. It's like America they always call themselves the land of the free. We're free, we're free. They sing about being free, and it's like, are you trying to convince me or yourselves? And I find that the same with the Mr. Nice Guy, Gary Lineker, and all these he's a lovely guy, And I always think, I'm not so sure. And with Jacinda, it was the same thing, wasn't it? Before COVID and all that stuff, they built this character of this wonderful, caring, wonderful human being that was, who we should all aspire to be. And that probably gave her some legs, really, coming into the pandemic, that she was doing all these massively draconian things, but people have that attitude of, well, she's a nice, caring woman. Oh, she's doing it for our benefit then. But then to completely go the other side of that, you've got someone like Tony Blair, who is hated. He's hated in this country. He's hated all over the world, pretty much. He's certainly hated in the Middle East. Yet this guy still finds himself in all these positions. And just to move on to the story with Tony Blair, obviously he's been at Davos in the last week. He always says the quiet bit out loud, Tony Blair, doesn't he? You know, where some try and skirt around things. He just comes out and says it. And I think with a lot of these world leaders, they've sold their soul, clearly, sometimes for power, sometimes, or perceived power, sometimes for money, literally that simple. But with Tony Blair, I don't think he has sold his soul, because I think he actually loves it. Like, I have that. When I see him, I think, you're not doing this for a financial benefit. You love it. You love watching the world burn. Leilani, what were your thoughts on Tony Blair's comments in Davos about needing more injectables and needing everyone to basically be chipped and pinned, essentially, so they can tell all your biometric data?
Well, I think, as you said, to sell your soul, you need a soul to sell, and Tony Blair has none. He's a war criminal. He should not be in Davos. No one should even be listening to him. He shouldn't even have a platform. But this is something that he's been trying to do for a very long time now, and it's completely obvious that he doesn't need to hide it anymore. He's literally said out loud that he wants this digital ID so we can see who's vaccinated and who's not, and mentioned future vaccines and those that are needed. So he wants this, and he wants this a lot, and I think he won't stop until he gets it, because, it's not a new thing. This hasn't been since COVID, the digital IDs with him. This has been going for a long time. So I think, the conspiracy theories are over now. This is fact. This is what's happening. This is what he's pushing for. And, nobody should be listening to him, though, at all, in my opinion.
Lizzie, why do you think they give Tony Blair a platform? As I just said, like with Jacinda, there's a niceness, even though it's false. It's there, it's sold. But with Tony Blair, if I want someone to be the front man of my cult, essentially, I want to pick a popular person, and yet he is disliked everywhere. Why do you think they promote him so much?
I've asked myself this. When I slip of him at Davos, I was like, why? It's the first thing that came to my mind. But I then also sat there and thought, if they want a tyrant they can trust to do a good job at being a tyrant, who to get in than Tony Blair?
That's a fair point. It's also interesting as well what Leilani said about why you're giving him a platform. If you think they call for the cancellation of plenty of people like Tommy Robinson, people like that say stuff that upsets people and people might be on the fence with in terms of their opinions, call for their cancellation, get rid of them. Yet murder 1 million Iraqis, not a problem. It is very strange. Peter, when it comes to Tony Blair, I had this conversation with someone the other day, that basically he's kind of seen as this nasty guy because of Iraq, basically, but actually he goes way earlier than that in terms of his grooming. And I remember there was a story, it was actually broke in The Guardian. So people will call it a conspiracy theory, but it was actually a published story of this happened. John Smith was the leader of the Labour Party. Tony Blair was just a little MP. He then goes back to Sherry Blair and says, something basically is going to happen to John Smith. I've been told I'm going to be the next leader and the next Prime Minister. Within, I think it was 2 weeks, John Smith drops dead. I'd be asking questions personally. What do you know about Tony Blair in terms of his past and perhaps being groomed for this role?
That Sherry Blair is the one that makes the decisions and runs everything, and it's not just an individual; it's a couple who are very, very dark in all they do, and it's not just the one or the other, and that's what I think makes them so dangerous. Because Sherry Blair is, we're told, extremely smart. Obviously, she's a lawyer, has made a lot of money. Tony Blair has made a lot of money. It was about 40 or 50 million, something like that, that I last read. But actually, if I can say actually that I think it's positive for us to see Blair at Davos, because I don't know about kind of his background and how he came into that. So I can't necessarily comment on him and John Smith, but actually seeing Tony Blair there, seeing the vibe, I watched some of the interviews he did, and I think it's very good for us as the British public to see him there, because we think he's gone away. We hope he's gone away. Because he's not in frontline politics, we seem to forget about him and think, wow, at least he's not screwing up our lives anymore. But then you see him at Davos, you see him with everyone else, and Davos is good because it puts not just heads of state, but academia and NGOs and media, and everyone's there together. And to see Blair there, you realize the world, the Davos world, the WEF world, the WHO world, they actually have extremely high regard for him. And he is someone who's still very useful for them, whether or not he's calling the shots on an area, but he is a very significant part of the jigsaw. And I think that's why I've certainly been pleased to see some of the coverage about Blair there, because we realize, wow, he hasn't gone away. He is still lurking there in the background, controlling things.
And the Tony Blair Institute was very vocal throughout the whole lockdown period in terms of coming up with theories of what to do on the mask mandates and whatever. And then they're obviously a lobbying group as well. And he clearly has a lot of sway within the Labour Party, who are, if we're honest, the next government. I think that's unfortunately the way it is. And also with Starmer being out there in Davos as well, that sort of points towards, the fact that maybe they're grooming him as the next leader, which is extraordinary, really, because I can't stand either side. I think for me, they're both the same thing. The Labour Party is just the Tories with a pride flag, in my view. It's the same thing, but they just pretend to be more virtuous. The next story we'll come to is about Meta, so Facebook as was, and Instagram. And it's a story that me and you, Leilani, were sort of talking about in the group. Now, when I sort of vocalise this story, a lot of people come back saying, oh, this is just distraction. Why are people talking about this? And these whole gender, and non-binary and all this kind of stuff, yeah, okay, it can create some division between people, which they love a little bit of divide and rule. But at the same time, it is huge. It is huge because it's essentially the future of humanity. If you're confusing people and about their gender and stuff, and you're putting people on puberty blockers so that they're infertile, as we are in the West, sperm counts have plummeted massively anyway. So there actually is a real issue here, and actually it's quite important. And so the normalization of this stuff actually all plays into a much bigger plan. So this story is that basically Facebook and Instagram will now be allowing, right, now, okay, whatever, but only non-binary and transgender ones, right? And my first question was how can you tell? That's got to be a pretty specific algorithm. But also, you've created a situation where, this beautiful female form that sustains life. So you can have a lady there, maybe one breast out, maybe she's breastfeeding, and, black and white and moody and quite a beautiful photo. That's out the window, that's gone. But Sam Smith can get his moobs out, that's not a problem. It creates this weird world, this weird reality. Leilani, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's a few things. And first of all, like what you said about people calling things like this a distraction, I don't think it is. I think the social aspects of what's going on around us are just as important as the political ones. So a lot of people talk about, the politics and freedom and COVID and having our freedoms removed, and everything else seems to be a distraction. But this actually is really, really huge because it is an attack on male and female, masculine and feminine, an attack on motherhood. As you said, they've been attacking all these women online who have posted pictures of breastfeeding their children. I'm not saying everyone should go getting their boobs out, every female should go and get their boobs off. But what I'm saying is that, like you said, there's been an attack for the last few years on femininity and the female form, and that breasts, instead of being like this, feeding and nourishing your child God-given gift we've been given. They're now seen as dirty and disgusting. And then you take like Sam Smith getting his man boobs out. That's okay. You can see these transgender males who want to be females with a fake nipple on, holding their child close by, pretending to breastfeed. That apparently is okay. You can have Ellen Page, who decided to slice off her breasts to look more like a male and then be plastered all over the Daily Mail and get called brave, and she's heroic, and he is heroic for getting topless after a mastectomy for no other reason than to try and look more male. That's heroic, but you cannot, appreciate the female form anymore. And I think it's dangerous. It's dangerous to young girls. It's dangerous just to everything. And it really pushes the whole trans agenda. It really pushes transhumanism, actually, and the ways that we are supposed to feed our kids.
Lizzie, as a woman, have you found it kind of strange that you've gone from this sort of this huge explosion of Me Too, which in its core, had absolute validity in terms of what some of these horrendous guys in Hollywood were up to, but then sort of expanded into all men are horrible, and it kind of became that toxic masculinity, kind of, holding a door open for a woman suddenly was a slight on women. It's just a kind of craziness to go from that to all of a sudden actually, no, it's absolutely fine to completely destroy women's spaces, destroy women's sport, and actually destroy what it takes to be a woman. Because now if I want to be a woman, I just need to put on some lippy and a pink beret and I'm a woman. Do you find that strange how that's happened in a very short space of time?
I find it very strange, and I agree with Leilani that it isn't a distraction and that it is actually quite dangerous. I find that the fact it's also very it's discrimination, because they're saying that they will only show non-binary. Now, I had to actually get a better understanding of non-binary so that I didn't get it wrong. So someone who is non-binary, they don't identify exclusively as male or female. They may identify as both, neither, or a combination of the two. So I'm just trying to kind of get myself up to date with all of this, because I find it rather confusing, because I don't know whether I'm going to say the wrong thing or, call someone he when they're a she when they're a he. Anyway, so I find it it's discrimination. They want everything to be equal. How is it equal? It's actually inequality towards women, especially on social media, if all we are going to be able to see and allowed to see is non-binary and trans. It's normalising it for a lot of the youngsters and the next generation that are going on these platforms, and it's conditioning them to believe that this is how it is.
Well, that
to me is strange.
Sorry, seeing the numbers of people that now identify as non-binary and transgender has just skyrocketed since of all this normalisation, isn't it?
And can I add to that, right? So if you take certain trends, so you had like Pamela Anderson, and suddenly all these women were going out and getting boob jobs. Then you had, Jordan, all of those. They kind of influenced a trend. So what happens when young girls see woman after woman having these cosmetic mastectomies, which you can't reverse? At least with a boob job, you could reverse it if you realise you cannot replace the breast tissue once you remove it. And there is social contagion. And I don't care what anyone says, this whole movement is caused by social contagion, and people seeing other kids on social media and these TikTok influencers and these absolute lunatics thinking that they can become the other sex and they can show it off. And when really it's a person who just hates their body and hates themselves so much that they actually want other kids and youngsters to be uncomfortable with themselves too, and not grow to love themselves, not grow to be comfortable in their bodies, not try and understand what puberty is and sit it out for a minute and wait till they're okay. So this is what we're going to see. If this is allowed and they really want to let these people go all over Instagram showing off their man boobs, showing off their mastectomy scars, then, expect that to happen to young girls.
It's true, actually. The misery does love company, doesn't it? So you've got these deeply unhappy people. And also, I find it funny when you see the videos that circulate, particularly on social media, for a group of people, a very small group but growing group of people that want to be different and want to, I don't identify as binary. I am something completely organic. I am myself. But they all look the same. They all have the same look, which is it's like a goth or an emo that's just like, I'm different. It's like, really? Because a lot of you all look the same. Peter, do you think part of this, obviously part of it's to confuse kids about gender and we are in the middle of a depopulation agenda, I think, and I think this is part of it. But also, do you think that it's also a case of just creating chaos? So you've got the confusion of this, now obesity is normal and fine, and so you're just creating a lot of sick, physically sick, mentally sick people that almost feels like the end, like the fall of like the Roman Empire or something.
Oh, completely. And whenever the problem is that there is no right and wrong, there are no moral frameworks for children to grow up, and usually you'd say there must be an adult in the room. The problem is there are no adults in the room either. And this recommendation from Facebook, I mean, their statement was, we know more can be done to support the LGBTQ plus community. And that means working with experts in LGBTQ plus advocacy organizations on a range of issues and product improvements. It's all about pandering to this small group who are extremely vocal, extremely abusive, extremely dangerous, and don't want any debate. We've seen that with J.K. Rowling over the last few days being pulled into the debate in the Labour Party. And you can't have a grown-up conversation about this. And how does it help anyone by saying, don't worry, we will support you to make sure you can strip off or something? That doesn't make any logical sense. But I also think it is absolutely essential that we talk about this. I'll agree with everyone else. I think it was a Bob Moran cartoon, and he said there was someone saying, Dad, what did you do whenever they came for the kids and jabbed them to death? And the response, well, we talked about a ginger upstart actress who couldn't curtsy. And I get that what's happening in COVID is absolutely essential. We need to focus on that. But what is happening to our children here? So if they don't kill them off, then they're going to just indoctrinate them and brainwash them. And you'll have the children, as we're reading a lot, turning against their parents because they've been so indoctrinated, because they no longer know right from wrong, and basically anything goes. And when you get to the stage of these large organizations who should have a duty of care, should have a responsibility, and yet it's all about how high they are in the latest Stonewall awards. That's what it is all about, recognition and ticking that box. And who cares if we screw over a whole generation of children?
Stonewall, a horrendous organisation. But I've seen in the last few days as well another story that came out of America. I think it was only Fox that spoke about it. Horrendous case of these two guys. They weren't just two gay guys. They were like alphabet mafia types. They were pushing all this ideology and all this nonsense. They adopted two sons, which they shouldn't have been allowed to do, because actually one of them already had an investigation on him for accusations that had been made against him. It transpires they pimped these two boys out to their friends. For a long time, they were abused, and then they abused them. They pimped them out to their friends to be abused. Absolutely horrific story. Now, Fox covered it a bit. Some other people more on the right mentioned it a bit. The left, crickets, didn't even want to touch it. But instead what they were focusing on was, I'm an ice hockey fan, so the ice hockey league in North America is called the NHL. The NHL had this Pride Day, which they seem to have every other day, to be honest. They've become quite a woke organisation. It's like, just play hockey, mate. But what they had is they had all the players' names and numbers in a pride flag. Now, there's one guy, I believe played for the Philadelphia Flyers, who is Russian, so he's already the enemy in their eyes. He is a very, very strong Christian, he has very strong Christian beliefs, and he refused to wear the shirt. Now, he didn't speak out about the day, he just said, you do what you like, but for me, as a Christian, that's against my beliefs, so I will just sit out that game. Do you know what I mean? So I just won't wear that shirt. Now, he's getting absolute pelters, calls for him to be kicked out of the team, kicked out of the league, and all this kind of stuff. But for not wearing a shirt, but they won't touch this horrific story of these guys. And it feels like, Leilani, we've spoken about this before, that there's certain things that you can't talk about, certain people you can't talk about. But do you think, in terms of that pendulum swing, that that's just going to come back even worse? Because when these horrendous things happen and no one talks about it, people then start, they start talking about it and they start taking action on their own in terms of repercussions.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that the people do take these two guys into their own hands, to be quite honest with you. But what we did see is the ice hockey player that you mentioned, his jersey actually sold out really quickly. And so obviously people were like, right, let's get in support of this guy. So, you have people that say, look, we want to accept what everyone thinks and we want to be inclusive. Well, okay, accept what this guy thinks and this guy's religion and the fact that this guy doesn't want to wear this shirt. Now, like you said, what is insane is that was blanket news everywhere. Yet this couple, it was pretty much like crickets. But we see that it's the same thing as when there's a mass shooting and someone comes out and says, it was a shooting due down to race. They just did it with California. There was a shooting, I think, Chinese New Year. They said, right, we got to stop Asian hate. Turns out the guy was Asian, and then crickets, silent again. Same thing when they had a shooter shooting a gay nightclub. It was news until they realised that the shooter was gay. So there are certain things that they just won't talk about, and it doesn't kind of fit with the leftist narrative to have these two absolutely horrific gay guys do what they did. So it's unbelievable. But like you said, I think people will end up taking things into their own hands if the law doesn't.
Do you see that as well, Lizzie, in terms of that? Because I think about, Eddie Izzard, for instance. He goes into the female toilets at a Labour Party conference, bold as brass, comes out, not a problem. There's a security guard right there in the video footage, doesn't even do anything. So I'm thinking, okay, so say my daughter's in there, I've got two young daughters. Say my daughter's in there having a wee. I'm at the moment, they're so young, I will just take them into the men's and take them to the toilet. But obviously when they get older, they're not going to want to. So I'll, wait outside the door while they go in for a wee. If Eddie Izzard walks in, I'm looking at the security guard straight away. Here, mate, a lad's just walked in there. Now, if that security guard doesn't do anything, then what happens is, well, I go in there then. Is that something that you'll see happening, Lizzie? And do you think maybe that's even the idea, to create more war and friction?
Divisive. And if you were to go in there to protect your children, which you should rightly so do, and, I would do the same, you're in the wrong, effectively. And I don't think we should let it get to that, because I think that there is going to be more crime. It's already happened. We've already had stories where these Eddie Izzard, not Eddie Izzard himself, but, these trans men, women going into sharing toilets or into prisons, and they're attacking women, children. And I just feel like it's something that if we don't make a stand and actually keep it so that it is male, female toilets. If they want their own toilets, why can't they have a trans toilet? Why that's an issue? I don't see why that. I think for safety reasons, because let's face it, it's happened and it's happening. I mean, this gay couple that had the two children, they adopted the two children. Why is there not an uproar about the children? Why is there not like a huge uproar about what happened to those children? And those children have got to live with the effects of what has happened to them and the trauma for the rest of their lives. Why are people not bothered by that? But they're more bothered about Eddie Izzard being able to go into a woman's toilet.
No, you're right. And what adds to the horrific things that happen to those boys, to then basically have no one really care, certainly within authority, just, brush it under the carpet because it doesn't fit the narrative, which is just horrific. Peter, last year we filmed a series called The Walk, and on one of those episodes we had we had Neil Oliver. And while we weren't filming, me and Neil were chatting and we were just talking about the state of the world and whatever and the way things were going and X, Y, and Z. And he actually said that he was less worried about the way the world was going at the moment in terms of this massive wokeness. And he was actually more concerned about this pendulum swing that I mentioned, that actually what will happen is it will go back so far the other way because that's just what happens. And that actually then what can come could essentially be even worse. Do you see that happening? And do you think maybe, that's intentional, where you have a situation where, like you said, if I go into that toilet after the fella, then I'm getting in trouble. And so in that case, people are going to be so distrusting of authority and distrusting of the states protecting their children, whatever, that they're just going to, do you know what? I'll do it myself, and I'll get a gang of lads to do it as well. Do you think that's what could happen?
It could happen. When you say, the pendulum generally does swing too far one way and then too far the other way. And I'm wondering, what will be too far for the public? What will be too far for these organizations? That's what scares me, because at the moment, I don't see any restrictions, any barriers that these people are not willing to break. And the amount of stories that we've had. So the BBC had a story the other day talking about an adult having sex with a child somewhere. Well, that's called rape, but let's call it out for what it, but no, because it's whatever kind of sexual preference. Then there's a story of the 60-year-old man or 65-year-old man dressing up as a schoolgirl, hanging outside the school gates. Essex Police getting called, stop calling us, he hasn't done anything wrong. Well, in theory, he hasn't done anything wrong, but you need to have a conversation. What happens when he does do something wrong? Is it too late? Or there was another story about parents and their child. They found a school report and it had a different name on it. And they approached the school, found out that the child was living as a different gender in school, and the school reported them to social services for raising that. And this is all about, I guess, parents losing the rights to bring up their children as they see fit. And when the state thinks it knows better, when Facebook knows better, when Instagram knows better, then actually there's no need for parents any longer, and the state just takes full control. And we've seen that their education system becoming more and more woke. And this, with the media on the back of that, is just worse and worse. And the pendulum is, to me, it swung so far, way past any point, but yet it's still swinging. And whenever they talk about minor attracted persons, you think, well, is that the line? It doesn't seem to be, because that's now a major conversation.
I think for me, with school, I remember I would be taken out of school for a week or so if we went on a family holiday. Obviously, it's so much cheaper to do it outside the school holidays. So you'd go off somewhere. You'd learn more about life and the world and everything on the holiday than you ever learned in the class. But now if you wanted to do that, the school will be fining you £200, £300, £400, £500, depending on the school. And you're like, well, hang on, whose kid is it? If you can fine me £200 for taking my kid to Centre Parks, then is it really my kid? You're right, it is very strange. And also, just finally on this subject, it feels very much like the media, even the right-wing, so-called right-wing media, like your Daily Mails, that they're just playing along with it. So there was a story yesterday or day before yesterday of again, a transgender woman in a prison who'd raped 2 women. And it said about how, she'd raped them with her penis and used the terminology her penis in the headline. And I'm looking at it thinking, you're meant to be a reputable journalist. At the point you write her penis, you're out the window for me in terms of, your credibility. It's just extraordinary.
Gareth,
Anyway,
I think...
Sorry, Leilani.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I did see that story he mentioned, and it literally said 70-year-old man, it was in Scotland, BBC Scotland had put it on the Twitter, 70-year-old man has sex with child behind supermarket. So a child, I think she was 13, and they didn't say rape. They didn't use the word rape. And there is no way, even if a 13-year-old consented, which I don't know the ins and outs, it's still statutory rape. So the fact that they didn't use that, it shows how complicit the media is. And like he says, I do think it is going to get worse, because you just have to look at America, and America feeds into here. So, right now it's like Eddie Izzard in women's toilets and what's happened in prisons. But I've been seeing a lot about these men in female changing rooms, not changing rooms, dressing rooms at a shop, but actual changing rooms at swimming baths, spas, gyms, walking in, being there naked, getting her penis out around the women. And like you said, so that, again, that has been covered on news like Fox News, but the left won't touch it. In the USA, there's a girl that's been quite vocal on Instagram, because it was her YMCA where this recently, another case recently happened. And the maddest thing about it is the guy that was in the women's changing rooms, is trying to get an injunction on her to stop her from being able to use the women's changing rooms. This is how insane it is. So, I would like to see the pendulum swing back a little bit. I don't want to see it go, so we start going around killing everybody that doesn't think the way we do, but it's got to, I want to see some kind of balance where it goes back to the middle a little bit more.
It's got to be fair, hasn't it? Because like yourself, Leilani, and me, if we were to go to a spa and we go to the female changing rooms, I don't want to be in a position where I don't feel safe, because there is a guy standing there naked in front of me, and, he has more rights because she calls herself a she than we do. Like, does our safety and does how we feel as a female not matter anymore?
It's for me. It's
that's what it literally feels like. We're kind of losing our voices, or that we shouldn't say anything, and that we should just go along with all that is being indoctrinated and conditioned, and subliminal messages on social media. And this is what you will see. This is what is normal. This is how you should look. This is what your kids should be doing. No, just let us be who we are, and we should all be equal. We should all be safe. If people want to do that, then do that, but don't encroach on my rights and how I live. And if I want to get changed safely in a changing room, or I want to go to the ladies' room and feel safe and not feel like I'm going to be attacked, or my privacy is sort of, being invaded. So it's got to be fair.
The left likes to go on about the patriarchy. And for me, there's no bigger example than that, than being a guy and then going, do you know what? I can't win, say, a cycling championship as a man because I'm not good enough. So I'll have the women's one. So that's all right. I'll put some lippy on again and I'll go off and I'll become female world champion. And no one's going, well, hang on a minute. It's all of a sudden that's acceptable, but that is a patriarchy. I'll have mine and I'll have yours and all. It's just bizarre. For me, I just think it's common sense. Like, for instance, in Canada, where you had that really creepy guy who was turning up at salons and basically demanding, to have a Brazilian, even though he's, got his, meat and two veg there, and then sued these places when they said no, because obviously he's just whipped his pants down. They go, I'm not giving that a Brazilian. And so he sued them. So what should have happened is, instead of it going through the whole court system, all the nonsense that happened, was that the courts just go, what's this? Go away. Because that's common sense. Go away. You're a maniac, and let's just carry on with real stuff.
In Scotland, they were just protests, and it's funny, they didn't cover any of the protests of the vaccine injured that just happened at the weekend, right? Blanket silence on that, but they covered the protests of these trans activists who were really upset that the English government aren't going to follow through with what Sturgeon wants, right? So you've got them walking along with signs, literally asking to decapitate TERFs, right? Which are, they supposedly, TERFs is a name for somebody like me. They're saying they're trans, I don't know. I can never do acronyms, okay? Trans radical feminists or whatever. So basically women who want to fight for women's rights and do not believe a transgender woman is an actual woman. So these people are in Scotland calling for the decapitation of people like me who believe in women's rights. that's all over the papers, obviously. But yeah, again, they just choose what kinds of protests they want to put in the mainstream.
Yeah, they choose what to be offended by and what not to be offended by. And often the horrendous thing, like we've mentioned the case with those two men and their adopted children, I won't be annoyed by that. I'll be annoyed by some words on Twitter. And the final story today is a horrendous one. So back in 2020, when the world was even more insane than it is now, a lady in Canada turned up at Toronto General with breathing difficulties. She wasn't very well, so she was admitted into the hospital. They tested her for the Rona, came back negative. She then walked around the hospital to try and find something to eat. So she goes to try and get into a little, cafe or coffee shop thing within the hospital. And she takes her mask down. Bear in mind, she's got breathing difficulties. Why she's wearing the stupid thing in the first place is beyond me, science. So she pulls it down to take a breath. With that, two security guards jump on her. Now, this kind of story broke because then all of a sudden she was dead. Literally. So she's struggled a bit, and then all of a sudden she's unresponsive, and then she's dead. Now, what then happened was the security footage came out, and the most crazy part for me was the fact that it's remote controlled, so it's not an automatic. Sometimes you get a camera that moves a few seconds, it will move back or whatever. This is moved by someone in a control room. Now, as this woman's being attacked by these two security guards, it gets pretty, once they turn the camera away, well, that should be investigated for a start. And then the next thing you know is she's dead. So all this footage has come out now. It's absolutely horrendous. You can see it all over the internet, all over social media. It then goes to court because these two security guards were rightly arrested, and the judge just throws it out. Peter, where do you even start with that? Again, does it come back to the fact that, okay, if you can literally murder a member of the public and it gets thrown out by the judge, then I'll sort out these two security guards on my own then if you're not going to.
Well, yeah, it's the hysteria that's been whipped up, and the media have told the public that because she was in the hospital, took down her mask a number of times, was spotted by hospital staff, that she was actually a threat. And by doing that, she was murdering others. So that's the narrative the media have built up. So I guess if you're a security guard and you think someone's about to murder someone else, you have to act. That's the level that people have got to. And what she was reported for doing. The crazy thing is that they said she had COVID. They later did a test and found out she was negative, positive. That's irrelevant. But it could have been put down as a COVID death because she had COVID on her record. And you're right, when you see the camera just slowly twisting away, and you've got this lady who's quite frail in a wheelchair, and it's brutal, but it's herd mentality, and everyone must play their part in protecting and stopping the granny killers, and therefore people turn on each other. And we saw it during the lockdown, we saw it during the demos, we saw it with the police going in and battering people black and blue. And they didn't ask any questions. They didn't think, because they were conditioned that they were only following orders. And that's where we've got. And this security guard probably said, well, just following orders, just had to protect those in the hospital. But while it was just about to come to court, the two were going to be charged manslaughter, and suddenly it just disappears. And then you've got the others saying, well, that's normal. Things happen, and the judge sometimes things don't go to full trial. The woman's dead. You've got the two people there who carried it out, and nothing happened. But it's that herd mentality, it's that brainwashing that drives people to do great evil, and society accepts that great evil as good for the greater good.
I think that's the most extraordinary part of it for me, Peter, is the fact that a woman's been killed. You've got the two people that did it. You've got the video footage of the two people doing it. I mean, I don't know how more bang to rights you can be. If that gets thrown out, then, well, what's the point then? Like, we may as well just have a giant purge where everyone just is free to do what they like then. It's just extraordinary. Leilani, do you think that it's just another case of this inversion, which we've seen for sort of 3 years now, where like Peter's just said there, it's the greater good. So I'm going to kill someone to stop someone killing someone. Okay, that's kind of weird way of looking at it. And it was the same here, wasn't it? You need to stay at home, you need to wear a mask, you need to get vaccinated to save Granny, while I'm putting do not resuscitate orders and pumping grannies full of midazolam and murdering them. It's that inversion again, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an inversion. And I've always said from the start, it's the order followers are probably the most dangerous because, you can expect the people with the supposed power, the government, what have you, to always be vile, horrible people. But when you have the order followers blindly doing their bidding for them, they're the dangerous ones, because if they just said, no, hold on a minute, let me just use a bit of my critical thinking, let me just step back, let me just take a moment and figure this out for myself, then you wouldn't have this happening. And this is an absolute atrocity. These people should bang to rights be done for manslaughter. So to be able to use the government whipped up hysteria as an excuse for killing somebody is absolutely crazy. And that kind of, it's protecting those order followers, because, if it happened like in Nuremberg, where I was just following orders and they actually get what they deserve, you might have this generation start to think about whether they will follow orders again. But when you're going to protect those order followers, now that's going to give a whole new dynamic to this that's going on.
Yeah, it doesn't send a good message at all. You're right. Lizzie, do you think, I've thought about this, when they were handing out the DNRs and they were handing out the midazolam and security guards and people like this, psychopaths were doing stuff like this. I wonder how much COVID and that whole era and these kind of powers, false powers that people were given, were exploited. And I wonder, I made a comment about it to my wife. I was like, do you know what? If I was a serial killer, if I was Harold Shipman, COVID would be my dream. Because you could just take people out left, right and centre, put a name, COVID, mate. Oh, really? He's got a bullet in his head. Yeah, COVID. Do you think that went on? And I know it's, I might be, call me a conspiracy theorist, that kind of thing happened. Because these two people have got away with murder now.
Of course it happened. I mean, it happens anyway, doesn't it? But I think the pandemic just was a big cover-up for a lot of people that probably were not actually caring for people and actually using it to hurt people and to cause harm. The thing with the order followers, that the whole psyop that was done on people, there are people who work in authorities who genuinely believe and were brainwashed into believing that by following orders they were doing good. And I feel sorry for those people, because I think they will have a realization at some point during their lifetime that they actually were not doing good for the greater good. I think the pandemic probably gave the likes of the Harold Shipmans a field day. They had ample opportunity to do harm. Yeah. And I mean, it goes on anyway. But what I don't get with regards to this story, with the lady that lost her life, with regards to the security guards. So the security guards were in an occupation of authority. You've got the story that came out recently with regards to the Met police officer that was a serial rapist, and how there was a big uproar on how people in authorities were losing mistrust for them, and, that they shouldn't be in that authoritative position doing those things. Security who basically caused the death of within the vicinity that she was trying to get help, and it just gets squashed and thrown out of court.
And it's actually not that.
I don't get. I don't get how there's the balance
to kill
there.
Someone either.
No, and I hope her family and the local authorities get involved and they appeal the decision, and that it does, justice is served, because we cannot have and give off the impression that people in authority, whether it be security guards, police officers, politicians, local authorities, that they can that they can go around harming people, and because they can just stand up and say, well, I was just doing my bit for humanity, and we got rid of her because we were trying to save these people, and then people just turn a blind eye to it. That's a dangerous place to be in society.
Absolutely. And I also think society needs to heal. It's massively divided on lots of different things. But where you've got one side particularly, committing atrocities like this and all the other things, like, because for me, putting tape around kids' play areas so kids couldn't go on the swings, these things were all atrocities that were carried out all over the world. For us to move on from that and rebuild society, there needs to be an acceptance that wrong was done and an apology, not just this whole kind of can we move on from what happened, but also there needs to be some justice seen to be done. So people like these 2 security guards need to be held accountable. And then once they're held accountable, okay, so we need to move on from this. Obviously the family's not going to move on from it, but you get my point. As a society, there has to be some justice, and hopefully that will come in the next year or so. But that's all for this week. Thank you to Leilani, Lizzie, and Peter, and thank you to all of you, as always, at home for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.